Alrighty, this is a YouTube video. This is probably going to be the best lighting for a YouTube video, and it's probably going to occur once per week at this rate, mostly because it's easy for me to do these videos in transit whilst I'm in the car. But I usually take one day a week off work, so I'm actually not doing my not work, sorry. I usually take one day a week off exercising, so this is the day that I'm going to be inside, and also because I have the place to myself and I'm not embarrassing myself in front of the person that I live with. So, with that out of the way, let's talk a little bit about always doing something. I spent a period of my life working full time and doing part time study as a computer scientist. My schedule was quite busy because I was a junior when I came in. So there was expectations for me to really, burn the midnight oil. And I think a lot of people who work as a junior, either in software development or particularly in the firms, I think the consulting industry probably has a little bit of that culture going on, especially for the graduates. So I wanted to talk a little bit about how I manage those things, and how at the end of a long day, you find the drive to do just something, to get something done every day. And that's kind of, I would say, was attributed to my ability to complete my degree whilst working full time as a developer. So I'm just going to cover a little bit about three things in this chat. First of all, it was needing the need to do that little bit of extra work. I also want to talk a little bit about how you can weight work in terms of effort as opposed to time. I think once I discovered that, being a human being, there's certain things that I find particularly hard, certain types of work that I find particularly easy, and just being transparent with myself about when are the best times to do that work. And then lastly, I want to talk a little bit about a change up that I'm going to try, and that's all to do with focusing a little bit more, because recently I've been slacking. I'm a graduate now. I'm only working full time, and particularly when work isn't demanding, I find myself getting a little bit too comfy. So we're trying to keep things going and trying to fulfill, things that need to be done outside of work hours. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my paradigm shift for working on personal projects. But let's talk a little bit about the need for need, and that's an easy one because that's all about the why. I know that's a cliche, but the why is important. I think it's also fairly naive to say as someone without kids, when we're talking about doing that little bit of extra at the end of the day, having kids is a necessity. I am childless. Still up for debate whether or not that's going to be a thing for me, but it seems great. But also being not child caring is also seeming great. So we will soon see about that. Obviously, kids is one that's a need. You need to take care of those kiddies. You want them to have a nice life. You want to make sure that when they're older, they thank you for providing them a nice childhood. Kids, that's a great need. That's something that you need to, prioritize. What I'm talking about now is the need for goals. That's my context. That's kind of how I'm going about things. I have to be quite clear with the things that I want to achieve in order for me to push that little bit harder at the end of an 8-hour day, sometimes 10-hour day. Things need to get done outside of the very trivial tasks of the day. We're not talking about life admin here. We're talking about real life. We're talking about actually pushing the needle forward. And then I think the last thing, or at least the last example of finding that need is helping people. I forgot who said this. It was probably a movie, actually, that people push much harder to forward the well-being of others than for themselves. And I think that's absolutely true. So that's another need. It's another need for a need. If you're trying to help others, trying to help a friend, help family members, you can always find a little bit of extra to push to help them. And that's, I guess, inherent to being a human. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about a need for a need in my situation. So I found I needed to finish university because the idea of continuing to be a student and working was a bad. It wasn't too bad. I like learning. I'm going to be frank. I do like learning. Learning is great. Either growing or dying. That old chestnut. I found it really enjoyable learning with other students as well. It was like really nice to be a part of an environment where we were all, it's like lightly competitive, but also there was a good culture of kind of group benefit whenever someone had a good solution. And if someone had a good solution, someone always wanted to come in with a slightly better solution or like a different approach, and that was always really fun to share. So it wasn't all bad, but certainly there wasn't enough hours of the day, and finding that bit of extra gumption at the end of the day to push forward definitely was aided by having a clear goal of wanting to complete university. So that was my need. Wanted to get it done with university and start to be able to plan a little bit further in the future. Because without that, I was a bit unsure of how I would tackle my professional career. Not to say that it was a necessity, but I think it's really helped, at least in my professional development, to have that ticked off as being a computer science graduate. So that was my need for a need. Now I found that when I got to the end of the day, there were certain things that I really struggled to do. So I was doing subjects that required a lot of debugging and a lot of stepping through code. And I found that cognitively quite taxing because what you're sort of doing is as you're stepping through the code, you're making a mental model. And I found that that was quite difficult for me to do when I was tired. So that was not an end of the day task. There was certainly instances where I needed to push to get that done. But what I found is when I pushed to get that done, it was a little bit distressing. I found myself getting a little bit anxious while I was like pushing myself to kind of take this cognitive load. So I kind of tried to avoid doing it at the end of the day because it meant that coming back to do that task again, I was reluctant. It was almost like, you're getting like slapped on the wrist a little bit too much. And then when you come back to the task, you're expecting to get like slapped on the wrist again because it's just not really the easiest time to do it. Not to say that you're looking for an easy time to do it, but you can make it a little bit easier on yourself. So I found that being clear about when it was easier to do these certain tasks made it much easier to sit down and like do the work without being so reluctant to get started. So that was a big one. I found that the easy things were like proofreading, not writing, but like editing. I found was quite useful. So if ever I was writing essays, I feel like proofreading essays is one of those things that is just reps anyway. So when I would finish for the day, I'd kind of like sit down, just like take it all in. Like, all right, we're gonna do half an hour of this. I would set like the half an hour timer. It's not exactly a Pomodoro technique, but you'd set the time that at the end of this half an hour, it's done. And I would sit down and then kind of just go through as much as I could, and I would sit back after half an hour, get a glass of water, and I would kind of continue that for as long as I could. But I also tried to not push the envelope too far. I would only try and do it in a set amount of time and say to myself like, okay, once the hour is done, we're done, and that's it. And that was obviously when I had the convenience of not having a deadline the next day or a due date the next day. There's obviously times to really push and you need to push, but you try to plan so you don't have to push when it's necessary as often. Anyway, I found that really useful. Prioritizing tasks in terms of effort, obviously that's subjective. What is high effort for you might not be high effort for someone else. Trying to think of an example of things I find like particularly satisfying. I think everyone finds architecting quite satisfying, and I think that's like a tricky one too, because I would imagine that like even certain tasks might not be high effort for you, but they're high leverage, right? Especially when you get it right, and it's almost the inverse if you get it wrong. So if you are doing a software architecture, you're kind of doing the boilerplate code for like the entire project. That's something you want to do fresh, even if it's not high effort and it's quite creative. You want to get it right regardless of how easy it is for you. So that might be something that you want to do in the morning when you're a little bit more fresh, if that's the time that you do it fresh. But I know a professor who says he does his best mathematics work late at night because he's not disturbed, which is fair. Like I guess he's had kids, so it makes sense that you want to do it in the hours that are like the least busy in terms of interacting with others and breaking your focus. So, it's subjective, but at least be honest about the effort metric. So, we come to the last point, which is essentially why I wanted to have this little discussion, and that's because I'm trying to do a little paradigm shift with the way I approach this end of the day task. I think for a long time, where it's become quite difficult, I would prioritize based on effort, and I would do things like listen to a bit of music to kind of get me going. But I have found recently, because I haven't had like the I don't think it's not proverbial, but I guess the theoretical, not theoretical, the metaphoric, there we go, the metaphoric whip cracking of I need to get these assignments done, that's gone now. So I'm kind of imposing it on myself a little bit by trying to be a bit more focused when I finish work. So yeah, as I said, usually I would put on some headphones or maybe watch something in the background, but I found that work became so slow, and I also am afraid that I'm training myself to not take the things that I want to work on personally as seriously as work. Whereas eventually my end goal is to own my own digital business, and build it and make it a good service for everyone, and not necessarily have it be this hugely scalable, unicorn. That's not the goal. It's just to provide a good service for the users. Um, so yeah, I want to be a bit more serious about that. So I'm going to try and only do small amounts of work, but in like 100% focus. And I think I've had success in the past by ensuring that these pieces of work are really small. Like sometimes if I'm feeling very unmotivated, I'll start it off as 5 minutes, and that's just putting the alarm on for 5 minutes, and then I'll take a 5 minute break. And sometimes that's enough to get the ball rolling. Sometimes I have to do that a few times to get the ball rolling. But the whole idea is if you're doing something, do it 100%, as opposed to doing it kind of like 50-50 when you're like trying to watch some show that you're interested in, which happens. But and like I think I used the excuse in the past of at least I'm doing something, but I now think that that's not good enough. Now that I'm a graduate, I'm a graduated man. I'm now a bachelor. Anyway, that's what I wanted to talk about. Essentially, those two things that I found helped me in my kind of push to get through these high workload periods, namely for me, university in the past, and trying to rejig how I approach doing work outside of work hours in a more focused way. So I'll let you guys know how that goes. This is a YouTube video. Thanks for listening.